everybody. Welcome to another episode of Office Hours. This is a very special episode. A very special episode with its own special overlay. And look, I got a guest. I'm not alone. I mean, I'm never alone because the audience is here. But like today, I don't have to do all the heavy lifting myself. Here to do the heavy lifting for me. It's Andrew.
Many reps.
That's right. That's right. It's an arm and chest and back day.
Oh, okay. Wow. Okay, I thought it was going to be like a brain day.
No. We're here to talk about fitness. Did you not know that's what the show is about when you wanted to be on it? I've changed it since the last time you were here. We changed it. It's about lifting things now.
Your attire and general attitude towards exercise would belie something different.
You don't go to the gym dressed like this?
Wear tweed only if you're in the like Victorian era.
So my special guest today is the famed Gonzo journalist Hunter S. Thompson. I mean, it's Andrew. It's my friend Andrew. Look, you know Andrew. If you haven't been watching basically anything that we've done together in the last 3 years on stream, Andrew is a frequent guest of this channel and a partner of mine in the creating of content for Roll20. We've played tons of role playing games together, and we've been playing games for it's probably almost 10 years now. So we've been going on some time.
Yeah, 8.
Old gamers. Yeah, we're getting there. Since the Shadowrun game of yore. So
rest in peace that Shadowrun game.
Rest in peace that Shadowrun game, or Shadowrun in general. The reason that Andrew's here is we're going to talk about their game. We're going to talk about not just the game itself or the development thereof, but we're going to talk about the worst part of game development. The worst, in my opinion. I would love to know your feelings. We're going to talk about playtesting. So where are we at with Girl By Moonlight? We talked back when I think I think our original conversation was like, hey Adam, I want to make a game. How's it been going? Catch us up.
So it started as an Apocalypse World hack, and then I became familiar with Blades, and I was like, oh, John, he did all this stuff. He solved a bunch of problems I was having. So I was just like, cool. I swapped over to hacking Blades instead. I made a game.
Yeah. Congratulations. Well, so that's the thing. The fact that this should be acknowledged. I want people to sort of recognize this. The fact that we're even having this conversation, that we are so very many months since the last time that I had you on Office Hours, and you're here, you're back. It's still happening. It wasn't like, I want to make a game. 3 months later, oh, fuck game design.
Making games is hard.
Yeah, making games is hard.
No, look, I got character sheets.
Look at that. Got like a logo on there.
Branding.
Shit, that's like for real.
Yeah, we're doing it. So I am now, let's see, at the stage where everything is more or less as it will be. I'm tweaking and refining. The last big overhaul I need to do is around the downtime action economy.
Yeah.
But other than that, things are pretty set. I'm working on doing pre-gen content for the 4 series playbooks now. So there's going to be like a default version if you don't want to make stuff up, or if you're doing one shot or whatever.
That's the part I hate about role-playing games. It's all the making stuff up. I hate that part.
Some people, we'll
talk about constrained playtesting at some point, but yeah, that's a smart move. Having something like that. We did a lot of that with Dungeon World as well.
Yeah, so I'm writing those up now, and I don't have any big sticking points on the game right now, which is a nice feeling. I'm just kind of
it can be both. I find freeing not to have like a big thing, but it can also be very like, what now?
Yeah, I'm freed from any sort of direction in terms of what to design. Be like, well, does that mean I'm done? Because I don't think it means I'm done.
There are a series. Well, here's the first thing. The very first thing about playtesting, you at some point will have to just decide, I am done, and just be done, because otherwise you will live here in Playtest Town for the rest of your natural life, and your game will never come out.
Right, like
It's
why not? Because you can keep refining forever and
well,
just noodle around and change your mind and
and a big part, psychologically, a big part of what can happen during playtesting is undermining. And you can be certain about a thing. You can release the version of the game that you want to playtest and be like, okay, I'm pretty sure people will stumble on these things. And then they can bypass those things altogether, and they can hit you up where it hurts the most, where you think that you're already sorted, and they can be like, oh, this thing that you're already totally settled on, this thing sucks and we all hate it. And then you can end up going back and redesigning your game again and changing
Mhm.
systems and ending up in
Yeah.
an unceasing nightmare. So let's try to help you not get into that place. Let's
I
try to
don't want
keep
to
you from
live in
there.
an unceasing nightmare. I want to
No,
create unceasing nightmares for my
that's
players.
right. Exactly. You want the nightmares to be in the fiction. So, playtesting. Let's talk about, I guess, the purposes thereof, and what is playtesting, because I think that a lot of people don't have experience with this process on either end, either as developers or as players. And I think that it behooves us not only to create a better environment for developers and for game creators, but for people to be better at playtesting, because it's a great skill. It's
Oh
really
yeah.
useful
I
and it's
mean,
fun. It can be super fun to playtest. So when you were like, okay, we're ready to play test this game, what were your thoughts about that process? What did you think was playtesting for you?
yeah, so like what does playtesting mean to
Right.
me?
It's the just the cheesiest beat way to start. The like, let's define the thing.
But it's really
Webster's
important. I mean,
dictionary defines playtesting as.
so I had I had a plan and a kind of vague scaffold for the game as it is now in terms of content when I started playtesting, but it wasn't all done. I only had the one kind of initial series playbook done. I
Mm.
had all the playbooks kind of fleshed out to varying degrees of completion. And I was like, cool, this is enough that you could get like a reasonably satisfying play experience out of it. And I had a structure for doing like a season of play. And so my first playtest, which was on Elf's channel, and it's all recorded. My first playtest of this version of the game, because there was that one way back that you
Hmm.
just with me. Um, so for that, that was like the real start of the game in its current form. Uh, and so yeah, like I I would say the game was like 60% done in terms of content, and like shit changed so much following that one.
Oh
But
yeah. Yeah.
that's like a lot of stuff was done already. Like
Hmm.
that was quite a ways along. Um, so going into that, my thinking was just to like look for friction in those early spots. It's just like where is there not enough
Hmm.
support, and so building the game out that way of just like when we hit a wall or when people don't get a thing, that means I need to explain it more, that kind of stuff. And so I have developed from there. So I don't not a super experienced game designer, and therefore I don't have a sense of like here is what a playtest document should look like or whatever else. So I kind of fudged through it and was testing my testing document.
Yeah.
Uh,
Well, the fact that you had any kind of framework at all for playtesting is super important, because I think often people consider there's a lot of different ways to look at the places where people first touch on your game. Historically, um, I think quite far back in D&D's history, there wasn't really this culture of playtesting. There was just constant change. Games weren't necessarily, you'd print 30 or 40 copies of the little pamphlets of D&D, and Dave and Gary would take them to cons and hand them out and they'd play it. But then the next printing would be like a fairly different game.
mhm.
It's interesting in that we're still in a place where the kind of games that we're making are static objects in a lot of ways, where there's like an idea of the game being finished. But I think that's it's sort of artificial, and it's something that didn't really kind of kick in until bigger companies started making tabletop RPGs, where they were like, well, we've printed 20,000 copies of this, the game is done, we are moving on, and if we come up with anything good to change it, we'll do all that in the second edition. Right? We'll
Yeah,
dramatically.
like because you're making a product, so at
Yeah.
some point you got to commit.
Yeah, exactly. But in now, like you know, Girl by Moonlight being a great example, playtesting really started like very early
Oh yeah.
in the development, which is good. But it can also be very destabilizing, right? You're going to end up, I think, fundamentally, you're going to end up with a better game, but it can be very destabilizing if you start with this sort of uncertainty space. And I think for me, playtesting, when I think about its purpose as a designer, playtesting is there to answer the question: is this the game I think it is? Right? Like
Yeah, exactly. Like this is what I wrote, but like what play does it create? And
yeah, yeah,
does that match with what I want and envision?
right. Which is I think ultimately the core purpose of writing the game, right? The idea of a role playing game is to impart procedures to someone so that they and their friends can replicate the kinds of stories that you intended when you wrote it, right? And
Mhm.
that's the test. Are you telling the stories that I expected, anticipated, am trying to design for? So how is that? Are you finding that to be the case? Are people mostly coming
So
back at you and saying like, "This is the fiction my group is creating"?
yeah, so that's when I knew that I was on track and why things haven't changed as much since that first playtest I was talking about on Elle's channel is that we absolutely created the kind of fiction that I was envisioning.
Yeah.
Um, with me at the wheel in terms of like I was the MC for that one,
Mm-hmm.
and my players had bought in. So in like a relatively controlled environment, it did produce the right kind of stuff,
Yeah.
and so that was a big like green light for me to then like actually iterate more on that kind of framework that I had developed.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and as it stands now, it pretty reliably reproduces like I've tested more broadly now, and it does make the thing that I want it to make, which is like a sad, angsty game about magical girls.
How much of that do you think is people coming into the game with that being the expectation? Because I think that can be a danger too, especially with closer knit community playtests or internal playtests, where if you tell someone this is a game, because it's part of the pitch process, right? They have to
Yeah.
know what they're expecting before they play it. So you're like, this is a game about this. So they start playing that game already, trying to lean it into the sad, angsty game about magical girls, right?
Yeah. I
Um,
mean, the messaging is definitely there, like across the board. That's what the game is meant to be. But the external playtest stuff that I've seen, like sometimes it's a little more optimistic, but other than that, like it's been pretty consistent from what I can tell. There is definitely an issue of like uptake on the mechanisms and stuff like that that I'm trying to solve, which is a matter of like manual writing, I think.
yes. Yeah.
Which is one of my list of questions here is like just how much of a manual to write. But um provided that people like can play a role-playing game, they tend to make the right kind of fiction
Yeah, and I think
broadly.
yeah, and I think that it's important to note that it's not wrong to tell someone what your game is about, right? Like I think that it's in fact it's crucial. That's what art does. That's what layout does. That's what the non-game text does. The back of your book is the first place you get a chance to do that. I think that's all good and fine. It's just it has to be part of the text. And in playtesting, it can be difficult when your initial pitch is that right? This is a game about these things, but you have to make sure that that's imparted in the rules too.
Mm-hmm.
You know, where you want to kind of release something into the wild and then have other people picking it up and then being able to parse that without getting any direct feedback from you.
Yeah,
But
your book needs to do that pitch for you
yes, exactly, because
reliably.
you can't be there at every table teaching people to do this thing.
This is what this game is. You're
Yeah.
playing it wrong.
Yeah. Well, and that's also the thing, right? That's a thing that people find that they want to do and is actually much easier to do now than it ever was before, where you can see people discussing your game and you can be like, "No, you're wrong. You're stupid.
This is my interpretation.
You
This
don't
is
understand my art. You're a failure." So, I mean, it sounds like you're not having a lot of that friction with the playtest. It sounds like people are creating the kinds of fiction that you intended with the mechanisms. Um,
yeah, and I'm fortunate in that I have like genre to lean on, which is a
yes,
really
I
thread.
something I'm familiar with.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah, exactly, right? Like Dungeon World occupies a similar space.
Yeah, yeah. So that's, I mean, that's obviously like a strong, and this is why I think that I try to encourage people to do a hack or a drift as their very first design project, because you can put a foot in that space. You can say, I don't have to design perfectly. I didn't need to design, Sage and I didn't need to design what tabletop role-playing game fantasy felt like. We just needed to nudge it in a specific direction. We needed to say this was the kind of tabletop fantasy RPG we wanted to do. But yeah, that definitely is that feedback loop and the way we interact with playtesters is tricky. But so before we get into the sort of deeper detailed stuff, so you're doing these playtests. How do you? It sounds to me like you're either on the right track or you're like basically done. So how are you knowing how to pace this? Like what are you using to kind of align? Do you have a list of like I need to confirm or deny these things, or where are you at? How do you keep that pace?
Deliverables. It's God, I should write it down, but it's mostly been by feel because I've been involved in a lot of my playtesting, and I haven't had as much external stuff that I've been leaning on.
Mm-hmm.
So at this stage, I have like a couple little like nagging things that are still bothering me, and I'm just trying to keep an eye on those. And it's basically, there's like the like economy stuff, like a lot of the more number crunchy stuff around downtime and the cycle of missions and how much like heat you accrue, kind of the numerical,
Yeah.
and like session to session economy of the game is one. And that's one where I've done a lot of meddling in terms of like basically the stuff I keep a closest eye on is all the shit I changed from Blades, because Blades is very solid.
Yeah, John did all that work already.
He's already, so there's a bunch of stuff that's really well proven out, and then there's my changes to it. So those are the things that I'm looking at most closely and trying to refine. But like I said, I very much feel like I'm in the refining stage.
Yeah.
So I'm also sweeping in cyclically, just like everything.
Right. Yeah. Making sure that the things that you are finished with are finished.
Yeah. And so again, when things, it's like looking for friction, I guess, is the way that I like to describe it.
Yeah. And you've described it that way. So is that something you're finding that you're experiencing when people talk to you about these playtests? Are you finding that? And if so, how are you encouraging people to get at those details? Are you calling it out specifically, like, hey, make sure you give me feedback about this, or are you letting it happen and then looking for those specific details? Because I think this is important, and I want to kind of, I've got some feedback on it when I hear how you're doing it.
Yeah, thus far I've been letting this stuff happen, and I feel like I'm getting to a point where I need to move into more focused stuff, of like me asking specific questions, or looking for specific types of feedback. That said, I'm struggling with like how do I get at that stuff in a way that is good?
Yeah.
Because because I'm conscious of the fact that I can shape testing dialogue.
There's
all about that.
There's a quantum observance factor that happens here where if you call out, hey, I think this rule is broken, everyone will be like, yes, it's broken. Yeah. Here's how to fix it. Yeah. So I think I like to think of playtesting as, rather than say, okay, there's the design phase, then there's the playtest phase, then there's the adventure phase and the camp phase. I like to think of it as playtesting is a series of rooms, not a coliseum, right? You don't just like go, we are playtesting, now we are done playtesting. It's like, I'm playtesting this thing, now I'm playtesting this thing, now I'm playtesting this thing. And I think you're right to think about end loading the effort rather than front loading it, right? Putting the game in front of people and saying, playtest this. Right, and only giving them the things they can playtest. I've had to do this. I remember having a conversation with Ash recently when she was playtesting or doing a playtest session of the Court of Swords micro RPG. I had to be like, do not change anything. Stop it. Don't stop changing my game. It's broken. I know it's an alpha. You agreed to it when you sat down. Do not change anything, because if you do, the experiment is worth nothing.
Yeah, it doesn't give you valuable testing.
If you're playing it to have fun, cool, but the playtest is over. Like, that's fine and good, and I want you to have a good time, and I don't really care about playtesting this game as much as I care about you having a good time. But like, if you actually want to help, playtester,
Yeah.
please don't deviate from the stuff I gave you. Don't try to fill in the gaps, because I think that if if your audience is people who are familiar with role playing games, that is a natural inclination at the table to just
Yeah. Just to
rule
smooth
zero.
those things over. Yeah.
Right. And that I think is why like play testing a game and playing a game are so different. They look the same from the outside, but when you're in them, playtesting a game is not about having a good, smooth game experience. It's about driving head on through the plate glass window, right? It's about experiencing all of the awful, bumpy horseshit of the game, because we acknowledge that it's not done, that it's broken and fucked up, and we're trying to
Yeah.
find those things.
And you kind of need to engage naively. It's
Yes,
like, well, this is what the rules say, so we're doing it, even
that's
though
right.
I can tell that their intent is this other
And
thing.
I think that's affected, like just anecdotally, that's affected me as a player and a GM, in that I will stubbornly, I'm thinking particularly about the Sprawl, I will stubbornly play a game as it's written, because I'm like, if they didn't want us to play it this way, why did they write it like this? Right. And
Yes,
so,
you're very rules as written.
yeah.
Yeah.
And that comes from design. It comes from playtesting. It comes from being in that position and saying, like, yo, you wrote it like this. Don't come up in my chat and tell me what you meant, because the book says
Because the
this.
book's meant to do that. And I mean, that's been my attitude in trying to write the rules, of just being like exhaustingly
Yeah, you
specific
don't want
and
to be
clear.
Jeremy Crawford's Twitter account for the rest of your life, right? Write clear text.
Yes. And as a former like quality analyst at a video game company,
Mm-hmm.
there's lots of that. As a player of like Magic the Gathering, there's lots of,
Oh
like
yeah.
the kinds of shit that I like often require this very like precise uh mechanistic interpretation of text.
Yes.
And so I try to write in that way, because it's a value that you and I both share of this.
I think that can be
This is what
tricky. I think that can definitely be a tricky thing to do, because you end up in a situation where you want to impart specificity, and you also end up being like, okay, is the thing broken, or is my expression of the thing broken? Right? Like which of those
Yes,
two things is
yes,
causing the
absolutely.
problem?
That can be one can obscure the other.
So it sounds like you're doing already what I would suggest in terms of giving people a focused subset of the rules that gets bigger and more complex as you go, right? Like you're giving them like, play only these two playbooks, or play only this subset, or pick from these ones,
Yeah,
and
and there
you're
was
giving
like a
people like,
widening out, and now
yeah,
I'm in the next release. I'm actually doing a narrowing back down and being like, okay,
yes.
no one has given me enough on these two series, so like play these.
So that's very very important, and I think you can do that in two ways. You can constrain, in which case you are going to get 100% of your playtests in that phase that will give you information that you can use, but you're going to get less playtests, right? Because people will be like, I'm not interested in
Yeah,
this
I don't
subset
want
of
to
the
do
game.
the yeah
So
yeah
you'll limit it, but it'll be more valuable. You can also give them everything and get them to playtest that, but you're going to get 80% dross and 20% that actually touches the thing that you meant them to. Like if
yeah
you want to playtest a specific interaction of mechanisms, you have to encourage them to engage that stuff. Otherwise, you're digging through your playtests. And in a world where it's not always easy to come by a dearth of playtesting stuff, giving that direction is super important, I think.
yeah. And I'm definitely I'm doing that both in my next playtest that I'm running, and then also, yeah, in the like broad release. The next one is just going to have two of the playbooks cut out of it
Yeah,
temporarily
sure, right.
while I work on the other ones.
Yeah,
So yeah,
which is a great way to do it. You never have to offer up the whole game. You can offer up the thing that you need to refine, and then reintegrate it back into the game and slowly expand on that. I think that's definitely the approach. So when you do the debrief with a playtest group, what does that look like? Is that a one directional, like they send you feedback and you're relying on what they give you? Are you having conversations? Is it a mix of those things?
yeah, it's a mix of both. So the playtest that I'm running, I tend to
Sure.
ask questions and be more, hands-on. But for other stuff, it's mostly just via email, because most of my playtest groups are kind of such as they are. There are not very many. Are just out in the wild of the internet, and
Yeah.
they will email me back feedback. The playtest document includes a link to an email where you can send feedback. And I have a bunch sitting in my email right now, some of which I have gone through and some of which I have not. Um, and so, yeah, it's a mix of like what people care to send me,
Yeah.
and then like a couple people answering specific questions.
I
And
was gonna say, so with those, is your process more like a survey or more sort of interrogative in the sense that like do you say, okay, you play tested this phase, you're in phase X, answer these 5 questions. And you do the same information for everybody, or is it more like I'm going to interview you by email and just ask some specific stuff about your feedback, or is it a combination of those two?
they have to just self-submit. There is no form currently. And this is another thing that I was seeking some advice from you on, is I'm just like, let me know if you have trouble with anything. Like, again, this whole idea of friction.
Yeah, I
Um,
think it's it's one of those things. Like for me, in my experience with Dungeon World, what we did was we did both. We did the like, here's the current version, just play it, and if you think any part of it is worth telling us about, go for it. But also, like, if you're gonna play test, if you're gonna actually contribute to the playtest, here are some things we want to know. One of the most in-depth playtesting sessions I ever participated in was the early Torchbearer playtest. The folks at Burning Wheel headquarters, they know how to playtest a game. The Torchbearer feedback spreadsheet was significant. There was a lot, and you could go and like fill in your row about what you thought about each individual thing, and look at everybody else's feedback, and it was a whole thing. So I think there's a sliding scale there between like, hey, let's sit down for 5 minutes and talk about how you felt about the game, and then like, yo, fill out the spreadsheet. Give me
yeah.
like, how many times did you do an OB3 test? Count them.
Mm, yeah, stuff like that.
Yeah, and I think that it depends, because Torchbearer is obviously a much more mechanically oriented game, but it's still in the same position in that Torchbearer is a mouse guard hack, right? Like it was built on something that was already there, so there were some things that people had built in. I find the like direct interrogative follow up to the survey kind of stuff to be the most useful. To say, everyone who does playtest X, answer these 5 questions. And then I will email or Discord or whatever you and be like, yo, so on question 2, you said this. What do you mean? Can you
Yeah,
explain how that happened? Like,
so
how'd
having
you
a
get there?
questionnaire as a way to elicit more feedback, essentially.
Yeah.
Because if you just say, oh, just send me stuff you have problems, people won't really send you stuff.
And you can give it to them before or after, right? You can say, during this playtest, please look out for these things. But like you said, that can alter the way they play, right? They can
Yeah.
pick at those things. Because I think ultimately, in my experience, most people who play role-playing games tend to be some degree or another like problem solvers in games, right? So if you give them
Yeah.
the problems beforehand, they're going to try and solve them for you during the game. You're going to get a lot of feedback that's like, yes, this rule is broken. Here's how you should fix it, which is the worst kind of feedback.
I explicitly in my playtest document, I'm like, tell me what you had a problem with. I don't care to hear how you want me to solve it.
Right. And this can sound like difficult or like arrogant coming from a designer when you're like, yo, I don't care how you would fix
But
this.
like designing the game is my job.
It's your
That's what
job.
I'm
Yes,
doing.
it's your game. Exactly. And even the thing is, like, it's a tough balance, because when someone suggests something, you might think like, hey, I wouldn't have thought of that. But also, like, you wouldn't have thought of that for a reason, because they're not you, and like maybe it doesn't fit with your design, and it can really throw, if you're not certain on the design, especially in the early phases. If you're looking for that kind of thing, or you're open to like, how would you fix this problem, your whole game can get undermined and fucked with, right? If you're building a
Yeah.
game on your own system and someone is like, Apocalypse World already does this like really well, you might be like, oh, I'm gonna abandon my game design and I'm gonna do this as an Apocalypse World hack, when maybe it isn't the right fit. So I think it's different between having other designers you can talk to who might suggest places for you to look, versus like having your playtesters offering up solutions, because it can really pull
Yeah.
you in weird directions early on. I think obviously you're sort of past that point, which is nice. So the way I would generally do it is like focused content for the design, right? Say like, in phase X, here is the stuff you're allowed to use. Don't add other stuff. Don't fuck around with
Yeah.
it. Don't do that. If you want to, you can offer them up the questions, but you could also just say like, play it using these rules. And then when they do, say, okay, thank you for playing. Phase X is closing on this date. Here's all the feedback questions. They answer it, and then you do follow up, right? And you're like, yo,
Yeah.
cool. I noticed that you're the only person who said this. Can you help me with that? And during that process, the most important thing is just to take a lot of put on your dogs in the vineyard GM hat, do a lot of nodding and being like, and then what? Right? Knowing the right questions to ask based on what you're trying to get at is something that comes from practice. But you're asking in your head, and maybe directly to the players, you're asking a question. The question you have for yourself is this broken? Does this work the way I want? Is this supporting the design overall? Is this creating the kind of narrative that I want? Does this rule work with this other rule? And you can be explicit about that, but I find it more useful to be implicit and to ask other questions that help you answer that one finally for yourself.
Yeah,
like,
yeah. Exactly.
Coming up with a spate of questions that are like, what does this rule do? Having them explain the rule to you without reading the book. Being like, when you do this thing, what do you think should happen? What follows from this?
I think one of the most informative things has been, that process of, because some folks like streamed playtests of my game and stuff, just being able to watch someone else explain your game to someone. Oh my God.
Right.
That is a thing of beauty.
Right. Hugely significant.
It's just like the worst game of telephone.
Oh yeah. Yeah. Cause it's like that's very much the analogy, right? Your game is the thing. So you're like, in my head, I know what Dungeon World feels like. I know that even when I run it, like I still don't do a great job of necessarily imparting that, but it happens, right? The game at the table is a whole other animal, but you tell the world through your text, and then they have to use that text to interpret to you, because you can't be at every single table being like, we're going to tell a story about these kinds of feelings today. The worst games I have ever played tell you that. They say, this is a game about this, and then do not support you at all. The mechanics do not do that. They just tell you so often and so hard, this is a game about this, that you have to get it in your head, and then you do all the work to make it that thing.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah. So it's very valuable, those follow-up interviews, especially in places. I feel like the most valuable stuff isn't the like nuanced, we agree about this. It isn't the like, oh, good, you understood that rule, but like, let me understand this a little better. It's the like, oh, you completely missed the point on this. Can you help me understand why? And that those are often the hardest. It's often the hardest feedback to get, because it might be your fault. You might suck at explaining that thing.
Yeah,
which is okay.
There's going to be variants anytime anyone else plays it, because they're going to have their own unique self that they bring to it. They're going to put their own spin on it. You can't control for that stuff. Is another thing I'm learning, of just like different tables are going to have different styles of play. They're going to have different attitudes towards the content, and I can't control that. Yeah,
and that's ultimately, you want the game to be able to survive that rather than to force it, right? Like,
like I don't want to be like, it's monolithic. There is only this vision, which is my vision. Like, take your body. No.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's the thing, right? Is that if you want to do that, like I'm thinking about Burning Wheel, because Burning Wheel is a little bit like that. Burning Wheel is a little bit like, there is one way to play Burning Wheel. And when it comes down to it, every game of Burning Wheel functions the same. But that's because the rules are such that you can't play it any other way without playing it incorrectly, which is to say, not by the rules. Like if you play a game like that, by the rules, you will get the same fictional experience as everybody else, even if your story that you're telling is different and the characters are really different. Whereas a game like Dungeons and Dragons, they can seem completely different from one campaign from another, because the game is written in a much mushier way. Both are fine, but as a designer, you have to know how broad you're casting your net, right? Like if you want Girl by Moonlight to be able to do Sailor Moon as well as Madoka, the net of the game has to be broad enough to encompass both, because people will bring, especially in a game like the games we're designing, they're going to bring their own shit to the table. Dungeons and Dragons is a very different vibe for everyone who has ever played any version of the game. Even for Sage and I, the arguments we got into is what does D&D feel like? And he would posit an example from 3rd edition, and I would say, no, that's horseshit, and posit an example from AD&D, and be like, we have to cast the net broad enough to catch both of those types of play. Yeah. So a broad feedback audience, getting your game into different communities can really help.
Yeah, getting different kinds of people to start.
Yeah, like for you, you're gonna want people who are just generally RPG fans. You're gonna want experience, varying levels of experience with RPGs. You're gonna want people who've never played Blades. You're gonna want people who know a ton about Blades. You're gonna want anime fans, non-anime fans, magical girl obsessives, people who've never watched Sailor Moon. Like, there, if you really want a broad playtest experience, you kind of got to cover the fictional and the mechanical bases, which can be really daunting because this is why people get bogged down in playtest. There's that,
Yeah.
have I playtested it enough?
Have I done every possible combination of human
You
beings?
never will, right? Like
Yeah.
that'll just never happen, but you can create a framework that is smart enough to catch all of those people, even the ones that you maybe like. Here's the thing, to use a terrible analogy, you can make a net whether you're trying to catch sharks or fish or octopi or dolphins. Like, yes, you can make a perfect net that catches all those things individually, but sometimes you just make a net and be like, this is what sea creatures are shaped like. Go get them. Throw them in the ocean and then let them go. Don't keep the dolphins. They need to be in the sea. But the idea here is that your playtest is learning where the holes are, seeing people slip through the fingers of your design. And that's just a matter of doing it enough. And enough is,
Well,
it's up
yeah.
to you, right?
So, gosh.
I mean, I think
yeah, other than go do it.
you'll
yeah.
you'll never get to a point. You'll never get to a point with your playtesting where you're like, yep, cool, it's perfect, everything's great. You get to a point where you're like, I am about to abandon this game. If I keep doing this, I need to let it go. It needs to be done. It's done enough. I'm fiddling with stuff that doesn't need to be fiddled with. Let's do the next fun bit. Let's design the game. Let's do a different thing and let's build this, which is its own whole other thing. Production is a whole another thing. But I think playtesting it's a trap because you can get stuck in it forever and never finish your game. Knowing the right amount of playtesting is, I feel personally, intuitive and not logical or logistical. No one can tell you like X amount of playtest hours. Anyone who tells you that, they're not,
Yeah.
they're probably a project manager and they probably just want you to publish. Which is cool. It's good to have someone like that poking you in the butt and being like, when's the game coming out? But also, like, you can't put a time on it. But never let that be an excuse to not finish, right? Like, oh, it needs more playtesting, but in the back of your brain, you're like, I'm just not ready to be.
I'm just never gonna.
Yeah, I'll never do it.
No, I'm keen to be done.
Yeah, and not because the work is like frustrating or tiring, because it can be, but because that's fun. It's fun to like make a thing. It's fun to talk about it and work on it, and then be like, check it out, it happened.
So, okay, here's a specific.
Yeah, I know you have some specific stuff, so I wanna let you ask me about that.
So, when you were doing Dungeon World,
yeah,
obviously y'all have a book now, which is there's like a bunch of writing and stuff. Like, how much of that writing was done in your playtest document or came afterwards? Was there like a siloing of like, this is just the mechanics I put in air quotes,
yeah,
and like we're testing these, and then it was like, cool, we're gonna write our book explanations, our book material. Like, how much of a divide was there between those two?
So
ideas?
we started with kind of the bare minimum, which was like, what can the players be? Which is to say the first four classes we made. What are the players? What do the characters that they make do? Which is the rules for combat and
the like reward cycle of the
getting
game.
shit done, and what do you get for it? How do you know you're doing it correctly? And that was our basic first thing. We had XP, we had fighting monsters rules, and we had classes. And then those changed and built and grew over time, and we added on, right? We added on stuff like perilous journeys, and we added fronts, and these are subsets of the mechanics that flowed from that core design, but we didn't need them in the early playtest stuff. As far as how much of the writing went, I did most of the, like, Sage did most of the sort of manual style writing, the like, does this make sense as a mechanical object? And then I would nitpick the stuff that he would do. I got the easy job where I was just like, no, that sounds wrong. Do it again. No, that's wrong. Do it again. Like, he was the Wozniak of the two Steves because he actually did the like engineering work of the game.
Yeah.
But all of my writing came kind of after playtesting, where I was like, okay, this is pretty, like the game is pretty much done. I need to bolster and reinforce the themes of the game. I need to choose the right names for the moves. I need to choose how we express the tonality of the game in not only in the flavor, right? Like I'm thinking of the class descriptions or the monster descriptions, but in the way that we impart rules. Like Dungeon World, if you read it, it has a tone, it has a voice. And I think that's really important to games. But I also think that balancing that voice is incredibly difficult because you can end up with a game like, I want to say, Swords Without Master, which is, I think, that's Epi's game about like Conan,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
I personally understand there's a good design in there, but I couldn't get to it because Epi's writing in Swords Without Master was it's too obtuse. It was too thick for me to cut through. I couldn't get at the game and play it. I think a lot of people have that problem with Apocalypse World.
I was gonna say Apocalypse World is a great accessible example for folks. Yeah, like for a lot of people, the voice is too much.
Yeah.
And there is a lot of stuff that gets obscured by the use of that voice, or there was a trade-off that was made, like keeping it stylish versus keeping it open or sensible, and
I think
style won out in some of those exchanges.
Personally, because words are my implement of choice when it comes to this stuff. The trick that I end up finding is that you have to write in a way that imparts the sense of the game without obscuring, giving people their own ability to write. And it feels like to me that stuff, that choosing the right words, that tonal impartment stuff, that is the same part of the process, and this is why it's late in the playtest process. It's the same part of the process as choosing what fonts to use, choosing your art, choosing what background for your pages, right? Doing layout work. All of that imparts tone into the game. In a way that's really important. But I think that because when you boil it right down, an RPG is mainly just words, you have to choose those words carefully. Like for your game, that sense of melancholy, that sense of watery-eyed hopefulness of the magical gore genre, that sense of transformation, the sort of the queer subtext of the game, all of that is going to come from the way that the game is written, because that's sort of that's the pre-show, right? That's the stuff that people will get to say, oh, I can now see the context for these mechanisms, right? That it's going to flavor that stuff.
Yeah, and so like this pre-gen content I'm working on right now is essentially like a warm-up exercise to all of that stuff, because it's me, like it is a writing exercise. It's making that voice come out in these 4 different subsets.
Yeah, and that isn't to say that every book needs to be like Paranoia or Nobilis, right? I think you can impart tone in a more didactic way by telling someone how to replicate that tone themselves. I'm thinking of Monster Hearts, because Monster Hearts, the writing in that is fairly dry in the sense that it's not like Apocalypse World or even Dungeon World, where you can hear me kind of like goading the player. Like, I dare you to play the fighter. I dare you. You think you're badass enough to be a fighter? Do it. Just come at me, right? Like, you don't see that in Monster Hearts.
At a remove, but
Yes.
it does do a wonderful job of conveying all of the shit that it needs to, and also it explains to you very explicitly how the game is going to do the job of getting the tone right and all that.
Yeah, Monster Hearts writing tone feels very educational to me, in the sense of like traditionally, like it feels like I'm listening to a grade school teacher explain to me what okay class, here's what we're gonna do. We're gonna tell a story together. Here's our activity, which I think is a product of Avery's style. That's just like, that's the way that those rules are imparted, how the rules of the game is imparted. So I think tone of writing and how much of that writing is going to vary. I waffle back and forth on my tonal stuff in Dungeon World. I think for the most part, I'm really happy with it. I think that it does a service to the rules. I think it's there to reinforce and to impart a tone. People have given us feedback, especially on like the Barbarian and the Immolator, saying like, this is too much, you're too tonal, you're pushing it too hard. But also those are extant classes. Those are places where I was able to say, you know what, this isn't in the core book. If you don't like it, it's not officially part of the main game. Too bad. But also I wanted to push that. And I think that we did a little bit of that in playtesting. You can playtest tonality. You can say like, did this make sense? Did the tone of the text feel... It's hard because it's like looking at a painting, right? Like, did looking at this Monet make you sad? Like, you're a person with complex feelings, and just because you hate the way I wrote Dungeon World doesn't mean it's not a good game or you didn't like it. It's just that that can be it can be an obstacle. And you know, I think if you take the stronger your tonal stance, the harder it is to make a game that is going to apply or appeal to everybody, right? Vincent knew what he was doing when he wrote Apocalypse World. He knew some people would be like, I don't like this.
He knew he was being a little shit about it.
And that's great. That's good.
Putting his, foot down.
I mean, that's the kind of thing that we can do in sort of independent small press role-playing that someone like, you know, Mike Merles doesn't have the freedom to do in Dungeons and Dragons. So it's, for me, that's more about, and this is totally about self-satisfaction. It's more about looking at the thing and being like, yes, like I'm happy with this tone. I feel like this is cool. I like going back into Dungeon World and I'll look over the monster descriptions and be like, yeah, that's pretty clever. I don't care if people like it or not. It does what I wanted it to do.
And it, you know, as a designer, this is your vision and you executed it.
Yeah.
That's the goal. It's not to,
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So, I mean, I think the idea behind that, you do some of the writing in advance, you think about the more writing you're going to have to do, but I don't think the game in playtest needs to be tonally like on point. I think you're allowed to kind of
you can just have like a perfunctory, like this is the mechanics, this is the game's like very baseline manual. And then later, if you're going to make a book, that's a whole second wave of work.
Yeah. Well, and that's the thing, right? We'll come back and we'll revisit this, right? Once you're done with playtesting, we'll have a production special where we can talk about going from text to book, like finished
product. Right?
Yeah.
It's a very different exercise.
We'll debate the matte versus glossy cover issue when we get there. But playtesting. So the amount of writing that you need to do, it's going to vary depending on what you think. If you feel like the rules are clear, embellish, but don't allow that embellishment to obfuscate your text. Don't undo the work you already did by making it more complicated or whatever.
So if we were to make a comparison, this is like what you would write for playtest is strictly the like how to play section of a
but keep in mind too that I think that how to play
that's most of the book.
Well, and how to play tone is how to play, right? Like when I describe the thief in Dungeon World, there's no mechanical rules there, but I put it in the book because I want you to think about thieves a certain way. When I accuse the thief of being like a sneaky bastard, I want you to look at that and be like, ooh, I want to be a sneaky bastard. And that flavors play. So yeah, so I think it's important to do in the playtest document should not be a flavorless .txt mush file. You don't want that because it'll turn people off, and also you're not doing your game justice. Like, flavor it. And if people are like, I don't understand any of this horse shit, like, where's the rules? Maybe you need to tone it back, but that's feedback. That's a choice that you'll have to make.
And I don't think I'll end up in that space personally.
No, I mean there's a spectrum, right, of the way people write, and I'm definitely on the flavorful horseshit end of the spectrum, right? I love the way like Luke Crane writes Kickstarter text, for example. I loved Apocalypse World because it was so buried in that tone. But even I have limits, right? There are even games that I'm not. So you find your space in that spectrum.
Cool. Well, I think we have answered all of my questions.
Well, good.
That was the last big one for me.
Good. I'm glad. I'm glad to see that you're surviving playtesting. I think I think the most important thing, if people are thinking about playtesting their game, I think the most important thing is that idea of listen to everything everyone says. Like, listen to everything your playtesters say. Try to tamp down that you are wrong and an idiot. Don't tamp it down 100%. Be skeptical, right? Because sometimes people will play your game in bad faith. They'll be like, I don't care about the Sailor Moon horse shit, but I want my name in the credits. I'm just going to try this dumb game so that I can critique it, or I can say something mean about a bad design or whatever. There are people like that. I'm sorry they exist. If you're one of those people, fuck you. Don't be like that. Who hurt you? Who hurt you, game player? But also, like, it's good to just like absorb as much feedback as you can and stick to your design. Know what you want out of the game. Solve people's problems, but not the way they tell you to. And knowing how hard to solve a problem is really important too.
You want to hear my favorite testing anecdote?
I would love to. Yes, please.
Okay, so there's a hotel, and the hotel has a lot of elevators, as hotels do. It's a modern hotel. And because of some quirk of the design, there's a bit where there's like some elevators only service the top floors, and then you have to take a second elevator down.
Yeah.
Hotel hires a firm of engineers to solve this elevator problem. And the engineers do a bunch of surveys and like try to figure out, like, can we combine things and blah, blah, blah. They do a lot of research. The final solution is to put mirrors next to the elevator.
Right? Yes.
Because the actual problem was people's impatience.
So yeah, that's this. It's the exact same playtest as the Borderlands 2 story, right? The feedback that they were getting in Borderlands was that the guns took too long to reload. And so instead of making the gun reload times faster, they made fancier animations for the reloads.
So it's like, oh, it makes sense why this is so slow.
Yeah, and it distracted people, and they didn't notice, right? Instead of being like, it was like they spin the gun around and throw it in the air and they reload it, and people were just like, cool, yes, it seems faster. So it's important to listen to people's problems, but come up with your own solutions that serve your design, which I think is the core of both of those sort of stories. Is like,
because in the elevator story, it's just that people don't notice that they're waiting if they're like, oh, there's a mirror, I'll check my hair,
right?
Whatever, right? Like,
exactly.
People's experience of a problem is a different thing from the problem itself.
Yes. Yeah, exactly. And that's why we exist in a space, especially with tabletop RPGs, where the level or layers between a designer and a player and a GM and all that stuff is quite mushy. There's a lot of cross pollination. So yeah, it's a thing that I think you can listen, especially if you're inexperienced at playtesting, you can listen too hard to what people suggest. It's totally valid as a thing. And yeah, use the playtesting information that you get. Try to guide people into giving you the information that you want. Don't just say, the worst possible thing you can ask someone is, what did you think?
What'd you think of it?
Did you have fun? Don't design for fun. Don't, like, if someone tells you I had fun with this game, they might also be the kind of person that has fun, like, slamming their hand in a car door. It's irrelevant. Fun is not the thing you're trying to do. You're trying to get a game that does the thing that you want that game to do. When if it's fun, that's great. If it's not fun, just wasn't for those people, doesn't mean it's a bad game. It's like being a GM, right? Like, you just listen. You ask the right questions and you listen, and you get information out of people. A broad base of playtesters is really useful. I guess that's a question we didn't really answer. Like, how did you get playtesters? How do you get people to playtest your game?
So for me, the way I got playtesters was that I designed my entire game live over the internet, and then I gave it away for free in playtest. And so, like, the whole process has been exposed, and so people have been able to see it getting developed and yell at me in chat while I was making it that I was wrong, and then later play it and tell me I'm wrong. But in terms of like I have an audience and I have exposure that I have accumulated through work of being on shows with you and doing all this stuff.
Yeah.
So that's part of how, but like, yeah, if you put stuff out there.
Well, and I think what's really important about that, the kind of higher level thing, is community participation, right? Being a part of a community of other designers is a really good way, because then you are offering up something of value, which is say your insight, your participation, maybe you're trading playtests with people, those kinds of things. Participating in a community is the best way to get other people who are interested. That's how Dungeon World worked, right? Like
Yeah.
we designed in the open. Obviously, this was sort of pre RPGs on Twitch, but we designed in the open. We shared our playtest docs. We gave everything away as we made it. The game, we still give the game away
Yep.
for free, and it encourages people to check it out. There is a certain kind of player. If you go to Metatopia, they're everywhere. It's everyone at Metatopia. A certain kind of player that just really likes playing games before they're done. This is why like Steam Greenlight is a thing. Like some
Yeah.
people are just like, yeah, I want to play this game and I want to see it evolve. Right, and there is a certain thrill to that, and I think that you can build up people's interest in your stuff by giving it away, talking about it, sharing it, and being interested in other people's stuff. That idea of like a sharing space for designers is really important, and I think that finding those spaces can seem tricky, but I think there are lots of RPG communities on the internet of varying quality. Attaching yourself to other communities like this one that are interested in RPGs and RPG design and participating there, and then also the idea of like actively seeking out people who want to playtest. There are communities that are built around that, like I said, like Metatopia as a convention, but then offline, Google Plus, weirdly the only thing I think anyone ever uses it for is role-playing game stuff, and it's a very designer heavy space. So yeah, it can be hard to find those spaces, but don't just like barge into the space and be like, yo, here's my 200-page PDF playtest. Hi, no one's ever heard of me before. Playtest this for me. Ask questions, talk, participate, like build up social currency, because
Be part of a community before you tap it as a resource.
exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
Grind some rep first before you start expecting cool gear. And this is a thing when we'll talk about this again later on when we get to like production and stuff, but John Harper described for Blades, someone asked him like how did Blades in the Dark do so well on Kickstarter? Like why? And he said years and years of just giving shit away for free. Like just being
like
a huge
credit.
yeah, being a huge part of the role-playing game community, giving away free graphic design, free advice, free like general design advice. Obviously, like Dungeon World was hugely influenced by John's help, and that's true of other designers, right? Jason Morningstar, Luke Crane. We had people who were there to help us along, and you want to be that person when it gets to be your turn. So be the kind of person people want to encourage growth in, right? Because they know that later you're going to recontribute back to the hobby. So
And
be,
also,
be a good member of the community and deserve playtest, right?
yeah, it also bears mentioning that like Blades in the Dark is John has made like shitloads of other games before that one. So part of why it's successful is that he is like a veteran of the craft.
Yeah, well, and I think that's the thing is a lot of people when they think of prior to Blades, when they thought of John Harper, it was Lady Blackbird, which was a free game, right, that he made and never made any money off of, but accumulated social currency. So yeah, and plus it's fun and it's gonna make you a better designer just interacting with other game designers. Some of them are shitty people. It happens. There are people in the tabletop RPG hobby / industry who are not fun to interact with, but you'll find your people. You'll find the people that want to design the kind of stuff you want to design. They're interested in your designs. They're going to have interesting things to offer. They're going to invite you onto their tabletop RPG advice show to talk about your game. And that's the great thing about participating in an environment like this. You find your allies and you work with them, find people to collaborate with in whatever way. So yeah, cool. Girl by Moonlight, tell us more about your game. Take some time to tell us where we can get involved in the playtest. People want to know more. Who are you? What is your deal? Because this is important.
So hi, I'm Andrew. I use they them pronouns. I have made a game. It's called Girl by Moonlight. If you want to play it or check it out, actually, let's pitch it first. It's a game about tragic magical girls. It's a hack of Blades in the Dark. It's a game about feelings, very much, and about leaning on your friends for support and overcoming oppression by way of your community, your found family, your chosen family, that kind of thing. You can get at everything via my Twitter profile is probably the best spot. So at Commuting Crow on Twitter. There's a playtest document with a link to the PDF for all the character sheets and everything. There is an explanation of the rules in the playtext document as well. It is divided into like 4 different kind of tonal subsets. There's like a really optimistic one. There's a really dark, edgy Madoka style one. There's magical girls piloting giant robots, and there's like a Persona-inspired dream travel-y weird conspiracy one. And so the game has a bunch of different little hats that you can put on it.
Cool.
That was the whole goal of the game, as we discussed back in the day.
Yeah. So there's a link. I put a link in the chat. I'll put a link in the description of the YouTube video too. If you are watching this there, you can just go down and look at the link to Andrew's Twitter and a place where you can grab the rules. And yeah, give it a look. Maybe you would like to playtest as well. You've got a new version coming up soon.
Version 6 is going to come out soon, as soon as I can get some of this pre-gen content done. And then also folks can watch it be playtested on twitch.tv/actualplay or on my own channel starting April 1st. There will be lots of places if you want to see it, and lots of recordings of it already played as well.
Yeah, I feel like if you search around on Twitter, you'll find lots of people's VODs and stuff of the playtest. It's really cool seeing it be developed and see all this playtest stuff just kind of available. This uncontrolled.
This is a whole different thing now, right? That like if you want to playtest the game, you can watch someone else already have played it and be like, oh, this is what the game is like, and then go.
Yeah, it's a whole other conversation about this sort of like unhinged, chaotic playtest space in that you have no control over. Like if they play it and they have a terrible time and don't pay attention to the rules, there it is. Like so it's great. I think as a designer to have to just be like, here it is. Like just you're free. Fly free, little design. Please don't die.
The internet is a tumultuous place.
So check out the game. Give Andrew a follow and check out Girl by Moonlight and offer your thoughts and feedback so that we can help make it a better game. And I'm gonna hold you to when you're ready to go from like playtest to finalement. Come on back and we'll get it squared away.
Yeah, we'll have our little.
We'll have our chat
every other semester. We check in or whatever.
Sounds
Mr.
good.
Professor.
Cool. Well, thank you for coming, everybody. This has, of course, been a very special episode of Office Hours. Usually we use this time to answer questions about game design and about tabletop RPG game mastering. I answer questions that come from you, my audience. So if you'd like to get involved with Office Hours, you can go to my website, www.adam-koble.com. There's an Office Hours link at the top. You can click on that, fill out the form. Optionally, you can record your voice if you want to hear it on the stream. I love hearing your voices, so please record your voice. If not, no big deal. Go ahead and fill out that form, submit it. I have a long list of questions, and I will get to them as they arrive. And we try to do this more or less every Tuesday morning. So hopefully we'll see you next time for more Office Hours. Thanks again, of course, to Andrew, my dear friend, for coming and being on the show. Andrew, I'll see you again for Burning Wheel in like 2 days.
Yeah. Thanks for having me on here.
My pleasure. Thanks for coming, everybody. We will see you next time.